Welcome to the Pacey Performance Podcast. Today, I'm speaking with Head of Strength and Conditioning at Edinburgh Rugby, Ashley Jones. Hi guys, thanks for tuning in to episode 32 of the Pacey Performance Podcast. So today we've got Head of Strength and Conditioning at Edinburgh Rugby in Ashley Jones. So a really interesting chat with Ashley, obviously someone who's been in the industry for God knows how many years. So we discuss strongman exercises and how they can be incorporated into an S&C programme for rugby. S&C for amateur rugby players, prioritising the essentials and how much is actually enough for these guys. Off-season conditioning for rugby and power training for rugby. We also get Ashley's thoughts on testing and a little bit on how we can use that data to inform future programming. So it was a really interesting chat with Ashley. But before we get going the interview, just want to say that the Pacey Performance website, the new site, is up and running. So that's still the same at paceyperformance.co.uk. So there's a little bit more information on there. There's a resources page which details all the information on the products from the guys that have been on the podcast previously. So Jason Webber, Keir Wenham Flat, all these kind of guys, all their products are in one space. There's also some books that I've read recently, so you can get a little bit of a review on what I think to certain books that I've had the pleasure of reading. There's also some blogs and resources that I check out at least weekly, so you can have a little peruse of that and sit and get on the links and try them for yourselves. There's also different ways to listen on the new site, so you can listen through the site itself. You can listen through YouTube as always and iTunes as always. There's a couple of links at the top of the page, so if you do get a chance to leave a rating and review, there's a link at the top of the page which will allow you to do that. So again, thanks a lot for your support of the podcast, and here is the interview with Ashley Jones. Hi guys, welcome to the Pacey Performance Podcast. Thanks for tuning in. Today I've got Ashley Jones on the line. So just before I introduce Ashley and get into give us a bit of detail on his background and education, just want to say thank you to Ashley for his time and welcome him to the podcast. So welcome to the podcast, Ashley.
Thank you very much, Robert. It's a great pleasure to be here.
No problem, mate. Do you want to give us a bit of information on your background, your education, and what you're currently doing?
Well, basically, I consider myself to be an educator. At the present point in time, I work in strength and conditioning for the Edinburgh Rugby Club. Recently arrived in the UK, December 28th was touchdown point, and just for the interview, and decided to not even go back to New Zealand where I was currently based and stay on. So it's been a great first 2 months and very enjoyable. But historically wise, I've worked in 3 professional sports, basketball, rugby league and rugby. And I've done rugby primarily for the last 15 years, both in Australia, New Zealand, Japan, and now the UK. So I guess that's my major area of expertise these days is physical performance training for rugby. I was a teacher originally, high school teacher, physical education and mathematics, primarily because back in those days, being 54 this year, back in those days, there was no other avenue to go into sports other than physical education teaching. Obviously now there's a wide range of educational areas that you can specialise in, but realised very, very quickly that I didn't want to teach people who didn't want to be taught. So basically went on and the first opportunity I got to be involved in professional sport, I took it and have tried to progress ever since.
So if you don't mind me asking, what year was that when you got into the professional scene?
First professional job was 1992. I was 31 years old.
Cool. So what was the state of strength and conditioning as you saw it then, looking back now?
I was with basketball initially. So basketball in those days was characterised by most of the conditioning was done on court. So most of the conditioning was scrimmage based. So we tried to do a little bit of off-court conditioning and a little bit of weight training, and it was more sort of keeping body and soul together as far as the players was concerned, rather than a really performance enhancement type program. And in that particular year, the team that won in Australia was a team called the Melbourne Tigers, and they did no strength and conditioning per se and just scrimmaged for 2 to 3 hours a day. And I think that set back strength and conditioning in basketball in Australia quite a few years because the players just thought that all you needed to do was scrimmage. Rugby league was the sort of professional sport that had professional strength and conditioning coaches, and in its infancy there was obviously quite a few good ones but quite a few poor ones. And I guess I've used the phrase preferential bias to describe people that program from their own experiences, their own preferences, and I think that was rife back in those days. I think good strength and conditioning coaches probably start there and evolve to put their own preferences aside in regards to what the players and team actually needs as where they are as individuals as far as their training age and injury history and position they play and basically that entire individualisation of training within a team sport, which I consider to be the holy grail of programming these days.
Mm-hmm. No, I like that. I like the preferential bias. So who was your first rugby league team that you got involved with?
The Newcastle Knights.
Okay. And what was were you kind of their first, or one of the first kind of S&Cs coming in at that time, or was there kind of a bit of a culture coming behind you? Not
really. I was the first full-time strength and conditioning coach. They had a gym owner who was the strength and conditioning coach per se on an amateur basis, part-time basis, and a couple of very well-meaning amateurs running the fitness programs. But they had no one sort of that specialised in that at that time. And the culture there, Newcastle back in those days was a very blue-collar, hard-working sort of town. It was the home of the BHP Steel manufacturing organisation in Australia and a lot of mines around that area. So the players themselves, more or less, all came from that area. Very good, strong work ethic, very good characters. And I guess moving in there was a bit of a dream job to start off with. Plus, I had a famous coach from the UK as my head coach, Malcolm Reilly, who was a phenomenal buy for the Newcastle program at that particular time. Malcolm was a great leader of men, and I know first rate that people would actually die for Malcolm rather than not give their 100% effort and face him on the sideline after the game.
So how has your practice developed since 1992?
I guess that big thing, as I mentioned earlier, about the individualisation has been my key focus for the last probably decade, and trying to get better at doing that year in, year out. It's I guess I've taken a lot of aspects from business mentoring and leadership programs and things like that. They've talked about that square with the 1, 2, 3, 4 in it, where management level 1 is like a very dictatorial area where basically I decide and you have no input. And then level 2 is we'll have a discussion, but I've still got the deciding vote and the deciding factor. Level 3 is primarily that we discuss and then actually you decide what you see fit. And level 4 is basically you decide and I'm here to facilitate anything for you and answer questions for you. And I guess if you're with a program long enough, you tend to move from level 1 through to level 4, in some cases more quickly than others with individuals. But I had 8 years at the Crusaders in the Super Rugby tournament, and I guess being with players like Richard McCaw and Daniel Carter and Greg Somerville and people like that for that extended period of time, you develop a level of trust in the programming so that you might initially be more a level 1, 2 where you make the decisions, but those players know their bodies far better than you'll ever know them. And I think leaning more towards that level 3, 4, although in some instances the more experienced player often likes to be told what to do rather than have another thing on their plate to actually consider. And implementing a level 3, 4 program into an organisation that's operating at level 1 and 2 is absolute chaos. And so you need to feel the water first and see where individuals are. And I guess this is why I call it the Holy Grail, because it's a work in progress, and some players prefer just to be told straight out, you're going to do this, this and this, and you're going to do it at that time, that time, that time, and you're going to lift those weights with those reps, and they're the exercises we're prescribing for you. whereas others want a real input in it. And some players just cannot do certain movements. So you basically have to set up I think the first thing I do is set up an exercise chart on the wall or develop it with the players and with the staff they have, listing down all the possible permutations for exercise selection across different categories, and to basically one-on-one interview with the players and work our way through the movements that we want and see if they can actually physically do them. And that's a lot of talking with the physiotherapist as well, and deciding amongst the team approach what's going to make this person a better rugby player rather than a better person performing the squat or the snatch or whatever exercise people like to program.
Mm-hmm. So you'd put that on the wall with the player and then get the physio involved, and they would basically inform you, how they feel about the exercise, if they've done it before, what they're like, is it, any restrictions or anything like that? Is that what you?
Exactly right. I guess there's no use programming a snatch or a split jerk or a push press and those particular movements if the player has a history of labral tear-related problems in the shoulder or reconstructed shoulders, and there may be much better exercises that they've found that can still perform certain movements but minimise the risk of injury recurrence and also keep them training and improving.
Mm-hmm. Cool. So just moving on to kind of exercise selection. One of the points that I forwarded across to you was about strongman exercises in rugby. I know you'd written a little article on it for Elite FTS, so I'll put a link up to all your articles for Elite FTS on the show notes. But is this something that you actively program strongman exercise into your S&C program for rugby? And if you do, when and how?
Initially, I used strongman training back in 1997 when I was with the Parramatta Club. We had access to a couple of big wool bales, and we had some of the baling claws that they use, and we used it as a pulling type movement in competition with mini team groups and things like that. So I've had a fair history of utilising it. I've seen it become quite fashionable over the years. I think it's a tough one to get ideas of improvements on. Obviously, time factors and things like that could be one that can be utilised. I've always used it as more a strength endurance type protocol, especially for my bigger guys in groupings that I'd classify into the red group or a special victims group that may be substandard in their metabolic conditioning elements, and incorporate that as one of the areas to utilise it. I primarily use it in off-season. It's quite demanding and quite physically tiring. So as far as an in-season protocol is, it's very difficult unless you've got some lay days and you can perform it early enough in the week to get over it, and also obviously get over the game from the previous week as well. But probably don't use it as much as I used to in the past. I do think it has a place. It's just programming it and looking at the group you've got and the elements that you can actually use. I was fairly fortunate with the Crusaders that we had a company called Get Strength in Auckland, New Zealand, that manufactured a lot of strongman gear, and a lot was bespoke type equipment manufacturer as well. So if I had any ideas, they'd put it together, and then we get first trial of it to see if there was any bugs in it. So we got to use a lot of their equipment in our programming. And the program we probably decided on more so was either a 60 seconds on or a 30 seconds on and then a 30 seconds recovery on about 10 different exercises, and working through about 30 to 45 minutes of programming on that particular strongman circuit. So it's quite demanding, as I said. It's I still think it's a wonderful type of protocols to use, because obviously barbells give you more or less a one-dimensional factor, but the strongman training gives you a lot of core stabilization, rotation movements, and handling different shaped objects, which is obviously what you do in a game situation.
So which specific exercises have kind of stood the test of time in your program?
I think anything that you can lift. I'm a big fan of Dan Johns. So anything that you can lift and carry, anything you can squat, anything you can push over your head. I quite like the steel log. In past programs I've use that as a core movement for overhead and rowing and bench pressing and military pressing. The Samson's wheelbarrow, and also Conan's wheel, where you zercher the bar into position and then walk around in a circle. That was quite good. And a lot of use of kegs and stones in previous programs. So, as I said, I've just arrived here, so I'm just working through budget issues and bits and pieces to get what I need to develop the program I want at Edinburgh. But they're things I've used in the past.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Very interesting. So just to move it on a little bit, strength and conditioning for amateur rugby players. Have you had much exposure to kind of working with these kind of groups? And what would, if you were to work with these kind of groups, how would you prioritize the kind of essentials that they should be doing? And what might a week look like for these guys who have got jobs and working around family and things like that?
Definitely. Actually worked with my club that I grew up playing for in Sydney, the Warringah Rats, in 1986.
Good name.
Great team as well. Great Northern Beaches of Sydney. You can't get much better. So they were very unprofessional as far as they didn't get paid for the job and basically turned up 2 nights a week and played on Saturday, as most amateur players would do. But also in Japan, the team I worked for, Panasonic, had about a squad of 43 players, but 25 of those were company employees. So they had to do gym work in the morning and then go to work during the day and then come back and do the rugby and conditioning-related activities in the evening. So it was a semi-professional program in that regards. So I think the key elements is fitness, and strength is secondary in the amateur game, because I think it's quite easy to go out and go for a run. In those areas, I really prefer a fartlek type training program where you can actually go for a run around a golf course or very pace run over different terrain in cross-country areas. I think you get more bang for your buck in that sort of regular running 2 or 3 times a week in getting ready to start your off-season training program or your actual rugby-specific training than any form of conditioning games, which we'd probably more use in the professional area. Oftentimes the skill levels aren't good enough in the amateur game to allow you to perform the conditioning game for long enough to get a conditioning benefit from it. In professional sports, I'd always try and use conditioning games as a major part of the conditioning program. But that sort of style running, since for most of the players is probably more beneficial, and they can actually put that in and around their work or school programs quite easily. As far as the strength training program is concerned, I think you want bang for your buck exercises that you don't spend all day in the gym. And I think I'm still a huge believer in the pull, push, squat scenario, where you pick an exercise which is a pull-based movement for the upper body, say chins, rows, that type of movement, a push-based movement, bench press, incline, push press, and then a squat movement. And I think if you were to list different exercises in each of those 3 categories, you probably find that by using those 3, you cover over 80% of the muscles used in the sport. And then any sort of prehab rehab that you needed with previous injury history would go a long way to create a fairly solid program, which you could do 3 days a week and basically get in and out inside of 45 minutes. So I'm still a firm believer that if the session goes longer than an hour, you're making friends, you're not building size and strength. So you need to sort of keep it short and sharp and keep the intensity levels up. And that goes a long way to actually getting the results done quickly.
Mm-hmm. So for the guys that you said at Panasonic in Japan, they were training Tuesday, Thursday, playing on a Saturday. What extra things would you be expecting of them on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Sunday?
Basically, playing a Saturday, I'd like them to do their own recovery on a Sunday. We give them ideas of what to do. Obviously, it's a lot more structured in a professional environment. But ideally, if they've got access to a pool or some form of low-intensity exercise for half an hour or so to do on that Sunday after the game, which would be ideal. The Monday we'd probably allocate them some sort of circuit to do, or a light jog, or some sort of conditioning work that would allow them to continue the recovery process, but also to tick along areas which they needed specifically to do. So it'd be more an individualised approach to that. So giving different groups different ideas. Tuesday, Thursday is obviously with us. Wednesday tends to be a recovery day. So it could be dependent on need is probably the best way to approach that. So again, trying to add that individualisation program into the non-professional players as well. And then Friday becomes basically a stretch. Some players would actually come in and do some light power work just as a finisher, but wasn't great necessity for it. But again, a good stretch and in preparation for the game on Saturday.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it sounds like a great situation that you've got the kind of employees that are going to be on site. I'm assuming the gym and all the facilities are going to be there as well. Is that right?
Yeah, it's the actual their offices probably only about 20 minutes away, so it's quite convenient. A lot of the programs in Japan, the gym is actually in the field is actually in the corporate ground, so they don't have much travel involved at all.
Mm-hmm. So were they kind of recruited to work for Panasonic and get involved in the rugby, or were they just employees who could play rugby?
I think initially there was employees that could play rugby.
Okay.
But I think the top league has come so far in the last 10 years that it's more a recruitment process from universities that they recruit rugby players that can fit into the company ethos as well, and recruit the individuals that can add value to the corporation but can also add value to the rugby team as well. And they have tightened the overseas import rules as well, so that only 2 players at a given time can actually be on the field in the games. So it's sort of some teams have 5 or 6 foreign players that they can utilise, but again only using 2 at a time on the field. But other teams have gone away from importing foreign players and basically said, no, we'll keep it Japanese. They tend to be more the lower level teams in that competition, but they tend to also have a higher number of non-professional players in that program as well.
Mm-hmm. So from a more traditional kind of English point of view, where you've got an amateur club or semi-professional club, obviously everyone's got different jobs, electricians, teachers, scattered around the local area. How would you kind of create that culture and that environment where they're expected to do their own thing on a Monday, a Wednesday and a Friday? Just from speaking from a football point of view, when I used to play kind of a similar level to that, if you asked the lads to do something on their own on a Monday, a Wednesday and a Friday, you'd get a look like you've asked them for a kidney. Yes. But I don't know, obviously I know it's going to be slightly different in rugby, but how would you kind of create that environment and get that buy-in for them to do their own thing on them days?
I guess the first and foremost, I really value one-on-one interviews and input from the player himself, because the more input they have, I found that the more compliance to the program that we'll actually get. So in saying that, if we can get 5 or 6 guys that are close by can get together and do something in a group situation, it's going to be a lot easier to do that than do it by yourself. So I guess first and foremost, getting to know the individuals, where they work, how far away they are from each other, what their plans are, whether they're single, married, and all those sort of details that you really got to know about, so that you can actually put some things on, some ideas down, and then basically say, well, this is available. I'll be here at such and such a time. If you want to come and do something, we can actually do it with ball in hand. If not, then there are these opportunities on Monday, Wednesday, Friday. I would do it that particular way, because I think that's the important thing, to get the buy-in of the individual. As you said, rugby, I've never worked with football, so I've only heard stories about the cultures that pervade that particular sport. But I think rugby tends to be that more group dynamic, which I think people get a lot more stimulus out of working together. So I think that's a key to potentially getting people to come in, do their work in groups and have a bit more fun about it as well.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree. All about communication again.
I think so. Again, I think the 2 things I learned in teaching way back when I did my initial training was communication and organisation. And that if you can nail communication and organisation 80% of the time, then you can always bring someone who's got more knowledge about a subject area. You can actually go to the internet and find. You can listen to podcasts. You can do other things to get the knowledge base that you may not actually have. But when you can communicate it and you can organise it to a standard which leaves not a lot to be taken apart, I think you are 80% there at least.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree. So just moving on again, off-season conditioning for rugby. I'm just going to draw your attention to an article that was on Freelap USA. You might have read it last couple of days from Dan Baker on Dan Baker's work about using MAS for off-season and pre-season work. How would you prioritise, what work is required in the off-season, and what would the kind of focus be for that period of time?
Oh, definitely. Well, you can't go much better than Dan Baker. Uh-huh. He's the best strength coach, conditioning specialist in the world, I would say. A little bit biased, obviously, being Australia. So,
of course, look out for your own.
Look out for your own. But, he's definitely one that can hold his place in any company. So his work on MAS and the article that I've read on his website, one of his free articles there was probably should be standard reading for everyone. Big believer in the MAS myself. He uses a 1.2 kilometre time trial test, I believe, from memory, but I've used a 2.4 in the past, and that's tends to be my gold standard first test of returning groups. So I have certain standards for various positions, and also this 2.4 Ks equates to the old 1.5 mile test that there's so much literature in the aerobic area from the Cooper's Institute available that I found it's a pretty good test to use with very, very good scientific backing. The reason why I like that as well is that even if someone's on absolutely nothing for the 4 to 6 weeks that they're away from you for the beginning off season, they can still complete the 2.4, even though they have to walk it. So it gives you an idea of where people are immediately. People need to go fairly hard from the get-go to get a good score, but if you've got someone who hasn't done a lot, they can still jog around the track, and at least you've got a time to start programming from. So from there, you can get your MAS scores, and I do a lot of repeated speed work, working on a 40 seconds on, 20 seconds off scenario at 110% of their VO2 max in regards to that average metres per second to run that 2.4. And I've got basically good tables floating around, and I'm sure Dan's got some in his research as well, that I can pinpoint the distances that players need to be running from a beginning point to an end point, so that we have some range they can actually work to get to, and use that as a base to run. I also like the MAS rectangles, where you have a work effort and then a recovery effort, all on the same time zones, either some at 10 seconds, some at 15 seconds, some at 20 seconds, and they're continuous for 4 to 5 minutes. So 10 seconds on, 10 seconds recovery, then 10 seconds on, working in a rectangle, all based around MAS scores as well. And then a lot of on-field conditioning-based work as well, with the particularly great drill that Malcolm really introduced to me way back in 1995, 94. His Malcolm drill, which is a down and up type drill with backpedaling, probably more applicable to rugby league, but very, very good for rugby as well. It gives you a pretty good indication of where a player's overall down and up and backpedaling ability as well, and also accelerations involved as well. But that would be my start point. And after I have ascertained where a player is based around their fitness scores, that would be whether a person gets selected into a more metabolic approach, where they do a lot more conditioning work, or they go more into a neural power group, which is more about speed training and accelerations and explosive activities. And then basically program from there.
Mm-hmm. So do you want to give a bit of a detail on that second group you mentioned there?
The neural power group?
Yeah, that's the one.
For that particular group, if they've attained a particular target on that 2.4K, which I think is most appropriate, irrespective of their position, doesn't matter if they're a prop forward or a fullback, I think they can actually move across and do a lot more quality work rather than quantity work in that area. So the metabolic group might be doing 5 metabolic sessions or 5 metabolic days a week, whereas the power, speed, strength group, I would get their conditioning via conditioning games straight away, so that they'd only do 1 or 2 conditioning game sessions a week, so more a game sense, ball in hand, small-sided games, which obviously gets a metabolic effect, but it's more about transitional work into the actual sport itself. And they spend more time on acceleration training, med ball work, sled drags, prowler sprints, and that side of things, combined with I run a program called a Speed Power Combo, which we do as a combination more acceleration speed work, so sled sprints, starts over 10 to 20 odd metres, anything probably out to 30 to 40 metres, and then some footwork drills, some ladder work, and mini hurdle work, and then go back and do, say, a modified Olympic lift, say a power snatch from hang, or clean push press, or just a clean, and we go back and forward between those. I wrote an article years ago called The Rule of 24, which based around the ideal number of repetitions being 24 to development of strength and power, and how you make that up is your own requirement based around percentages, so that you could actually do 8 sets of 3 equaling 24 total reps, and use a weight around 85+%. Or if you went back to more, say, the conjugate style with Westside, using, say, 8 sets of 3 at, say, an increasing percentage of acceleration work, say 50, 55 and 60%. So depending on where you're come research-wise, working on those percentages to get what you require, whether it's attempted acceleration with a much heavier percentage of maximum, or bar speed based on velocity-based training and things like that.
Mm-hmm. So where was that article published?
Let me see. There was probably one in the last 2 years at elitefts.net.
Okay, I'll just stick the link up, that's all, so people can have a little look.
Yeah, I think it's, was honoured to have my first article published there in January of 2013, and they've published probably about 20 to 25 of my articles ever since. So there's a fairly good selection, I think, of philosophy-based and programming-based articles there that people can access free of charge.
Cool. So you just mentioned sled work there. What are your thoughts on the kind of weight that should be going on that sled, and how would you vary that depending on the goal of the session?
I tend to vary weight depending on distance. So I tend to go a heavier load. I know what the speed specialists talk about. The loading has to be a certain percentage of body weight, so it doesn't actually interfere with transition into the actual sprinting activity. But reality is that my sprinting guys, probably 90+% of the time ends in a collision. So they're probably in a acceleration position nearly all the time. So the weight, I tend to get up to quite heavy loads, probably even 50% of the individual's body mass. And that might only be to over 10 to 15, 20 metres. Whereas as I use it for my, say, top end speed guys, it could only be, say, 20 kilos on the sled itself and getting out to 60 metres. So it's usually, and you usually do a nice potentiation type activity with that as well, where you could actually do a set of power cleans and then go straight into a set of sled sprints and then back and do something else. And that actually potentiates each other quite nicely. Similar to the speed power combo, which I mentioned earlier.
So what kind of weight would you be looking on the power clean?
Again, I would probably go light and fast. So I'd probably looking at between 60 and 70% and looking at between 3 and 6 repetitions.
Okay. Interesting. So, I mean, you obviously mentioned Olympic lifting there, which is the next point. So, nice little segue into that. So, power training for team sports, obviously in particular rugby. Is Olympic lifting going to be absolutely essential for your S&C program in rugby?
That is a great question. That's one that I often get asked. I guess I had a preferential bias with Olympic lifting, and probably not being a great Olympic lifter, but really enjoyed the sport and I enjoyed the movements myself. But I love what has been said about we're training rugby players, we're not training Olympic weightlifters. So I don't think Olympic lifting is essential. and I'll probably create some heresies by saying that. But I think obviously it's one of the best ways to get massive acceleration of the bar in a very short period of time. Great for rate of force development. But some players cannot just perform the movement. So I think you need to look, again, this individual approach. Some people can't rack a clean. Some people can't finish a snatch because of shoulder-related problems, or they've got one shoulder that won't actually lock into position correctly. So I think people jumped on the Olympic lifting bandwagon, and remembering that the National Strength and Conditioning Association, of which I'm a member and have been a CSCS for over 25 years, was all initially started by old Olympic lifters. So it has had that preferential bias since day one, but I think it's evolving somewhat over the last few years in that the triple extension is what we're trying to achieve through the ankle, the knee, and the hip. It's how you get that triple extension and how you train it, which is more important than the actual exercise itself. So I think you can get a triple extension by doing box squats correctly. You can get a triple extension by some sort of jump-related squat movement, by a sled pull, by a prowler push. So, again, it's just working with the individual player or individual athlete and seeing what they can do, how quickly they pick up skills. And Olympic lifting is a complex motor skill, and it does take time to perfect. If you're an amateur athlete and you're concentrating on getting stronger to play rugby, maybe you just don't have the time to devote to a more skilled performance in the Olympic lifts, whereby you benefit more greatly from learning how to squat properly, which takes less time to learn than to perform a snatch correctly. In saying that, I still include a category of Olympic lifts in all of my programs. Not everyone does Olympic lifts. They tend to be more for that neural group, which I mentioned earlier. They might be used as a primer for hypertrophy. They might do like a light, fast set of snatches and then go into heavy deadlifts as like a contrast potentiation type movement. So they have their place, definitely. Whether they should be used by everyone all the time, no. I think they don't. I think, as Louis Simmons has said in the past, that every exercise and every program works, but they don't work forever. So, and you have to find the one that works best for you.
Mm-hmm. So how would jump training and plyometrics fit into power training with the guys that you're working with?
A key ingredient I use a lot for contrast training. So they might perform an Olympic movement and then go to a set of box squats. In that particular area, we might do some of that speed power combo where instead of doing a power-based exercise, they might do jumps instead and then go out and do some accelerations. So a lot to do with potentiation and activation, both primarily lower body plyometrics, but also some upper body plyometrics with med balls and clap push-ups and crossover push-ups and things like that on top of the med ball, looking primarily at using that as the contrast and as the explosive element within the program.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned med balls there. How are you incorporating med balls into your program? What kind of exercise you're looking at, and why you would stick them in there?
I quite like the contrast that med balls give you. I mean, I've used it's like a scoop toss with a med ball, so that you get full release height of the med ball and acceleration of the limbs and the lower body in one continuous action. I guess what the Olympic lifts don't give you is that a lot of people actually tend to decelerate at the point where you should be continuing the acceleration as much as possible. I remember years ago listening to people talking about the Russian weightlifters, where they would perform a snatch in an area which had either a high ceiling or outside, where they'd actually let the bar go at the completion at the top of the movement. So you got that full extension of the body, and you often hear Olympic weightlifting coach finish the pull, which a lot of people actually try and get under the bar too quickly, and they actually don't finish that full extension. So to actually release the bar at the top of the range of motion you actually get that continuous movement. So I think that's what med balls give you. And if you use that as a contrast to either a push press or a clean and push press or something like that, you actually get a great transitional movement as well. And then combine that with a short acceleration sprint, then you're covering a few bases in a couple of different movements.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting. We're coming to 40 minutes, so I don't want to keep you for too much longer.
Oh no, you talk for me as long as you like to, because I'm enjoying the chat.
Cool. Let's keep going then. I'm happy. So testing for rugby again. Harping back to your Elite FTS articles. Testing for rugby and how the data is going to inform your future programming. So how would you choose the testing battery that you're going to use with your players coming back from the off-season? And how would that kind of, obviously we're collecting loads of data, but how would that inform your program design?
I think, as I mentioned earlier, the 2.4K time trial test is the one I do first and foremost, because I think it's the safest test to do under the assumption that some players have done more than what you wanted, some players have done less, and some players might have done nothing at all. So they can actually at least register a score. I don't like doing any speed testing or any maximal strength testing at all in the initial phases, because I think the chance of injury is quite high in that particular area. Strength testing in general, since my program tends to go down to heavy doubles and heavy triples on a regular basis, I don't actually test for strength. I use an estimation of 1RM based off my 2RM and 3RM loads by simply putting them into the appropriate formulas and generating those, which I found to be above 95% accurate, so which is good enough for me to ensure that players are working at the correct level of intensity without sort of having an issue as far as potential injury is concerned when they want to go for that extra couple of kilograms on a 1RM left. Same with speed testing, we tend to have our testing gates or our speed gates out at every speed training session throughout the year. So we're accumulating data on that as well. And I guess the most important thing with speed training is that you are getting towards maximal velocity on your sprints, so that you actually are training speed by running fast. You can't get fast by running slow. So they're more sort of ongoing monitoring, if you like, rather than actual testing. So I think that's a key to the programming that I utilise. With the utilisation of probably more and more GPS monitoring, I guess, you're getting so much data from sports scientists that often it's hard to know which pieces of data to use in programming. But I guess I really like the metrics associated with the amount of high-speed running that's been done, and use that as an indicator whether someone needs a bit of a top-up as far as training is concerned. The total distance that someone might do in a session is also an important factor for me. The mechanical loads or body loads, from depending on which company you use, the accumulation of accelerations and decelerations and changes of directions are quite important as determining a loading factor on particularly eccentric loading and potential DOMs and associated areas. And also the collision data we get from games is very important as to monitoring how much contact a player is getting in game-wise and also at training, and also the level of loading that players are getting overall from games. So we tend to get a lot of data in that and give a more or less a subjective score based on what they've actually done in a game. We tend to say that the engagement of a tight head prop in a scrum is basically 10 out of 10. You can't get any more contact than a tight head engaging in the scrum. So if they were to do a combination of 8 scrums and 5 resets, that's 13 engagements. So he would score 130 points for that. And obviously first arrival, second arrival and third arrival at rucks, and also tackles and carries and things like that, which accumulates to sometimes a score over 500 points. And that will give us an indication of what levels of contact that a player has achieved over time, which can give us influences on how we program them for the first couple of days of the week coming back from that game as well. I think the important thing with the GPS, and there's a great story told to me by a friend of mine in Dublin, that GAA is using GPS quite a lot these days, and a sports scientist was sitting next to the head coach on the bench, and the sports scientist mentioned that number 17 player has you need to take him off. He's basically only had 5 possessions in the last 20 minutes. And the coach, who was more of an old school coach, looked at him and said, well, his name is Seamus Murphy, and he deserves to be called Seamus. I don't care what number he is. His name is Seamus. And by the way, do you know what he's actually done in those 5 possessions? And the scientist said, no. He said, well, he scored 3 goals too. He's actually basically the difference between us winning this game and losing at the present point in time. So he's staying on. Thank you. So I guess we have to be careful looking at just the data and being sort of cut away from the reality of the game itself. But I think a lot of people obviously are using it correctly. Over the first few years, there was just so much data being spewed out, and some of the pivot tables that you actually got would go on for kilometres. So it's I get more and more benefits associated with utilisation of the GPS, and even more so combined with heart rate data to give a better idea of where players are, what they've done in the game, what they've done in training, and how they need to be topped up in specific areas. And probably more importantly, as far as my perspective is coming back from injury and using them as markers to gradually improve rehabilitation into performance, so that we know where they are and at what stage they can come back into full training and then playing again.
Early on that little piece, you mentioned using timing gates for your sprints. Or any sprint training you do, you got the timing gates out.
Yep.
What kind of are you looking at percentages, decrements before you kind of call it a day? Are you looking at a point something of a second before they're getting fatigued and they're done? How are you working that out?
We probably, the last wee while, we've just been doing it as a monitoring tool, and we probably only get them to go through the gates 2 or 3 times in the course of the session. So it's more just to look at if someone's dropping away, and so that we can actually see that very quickly, rather than wait 5 or 6 weeks and retest someone through the gates and say, oh, geez, he's considerably slower than he was 6 weeks ago, and ask why. So I guess we're doing that so that we've got a week in, week out idea of where a player is. And I've also enjoyed using them over the last couple of weeks to actually look at what actual potentiation some of that speed power combo training is giving to our players, and it's actually starting to show some benefits with certain individuals.
Interesting. So, I mean, I'm coming up to 45 minutes, so I'll tell you what we'll do. I will. You've got a couple of things out that are advertised on Elite FTS. Am I right in thinking there's a book there?
There's a book, yes, that EliteFTS.net have greatly put on their website. It's Engineering Physical Performance. It's an ebook which is available on their website if people would like to look at that. That's a combination. It's a little bit biographical in details, particularly with earlier years, but a lot of programs that I've used, and no pictures, just information. So if you're looking for a picture book, it's not going to be the one for you, but hopefully there's at least 1 or 2 things in there that might get you to think a slightly different way, or to use to some performance improvement.
Cool. I'll put a link up to that as well on the site so people can check that out. So where can people keep in touch with what you've got going on, apart from Elite FTS, of course?
I guess that's the best forum for me. I guess it's because I've hopefully got a few more articles in me. They'll be published on a probably 4 to 6 week basis on EliteFTS.net. So there's a comment section in there that people can to contact with me. I try very hard to answer every person who puts a comment up there. Sometimes if it's a quick and easy answer, I can get it pretty quickly. If it takes a little bit more thought, it might be a week or 2 until I get back to someone, or depending where I am in the season, how much time I have. But I think that's the best. I've been honoured to give a talk at UK SCA this year, coming up in August, or late July, early August, I believe it is. So looking forward for doing that one. It's always been one of my bucket list type things to do, is to speak at one of these major European or United States conferences, and receiving the offer a couple of weeks after I arrived was quite a surprise and quite an honour.
So what's the discussion going to be on at the UKCA?
I think they're holding it, but it's to do more with the individualisation and transfer of training from my experiences. I'm not a sports scientist. I have a master's degree, but I would never ever call myself a sports scientist because I think it's such a detailed specialist area. As I said right at the beginning, I really see myself as an educator, and hopefully I can use elements of sports science to get the messages across to people. And if I need any sports science, I tend to have a few go-to people that I speak to get that information from.
So just as a matter of interest, who are them go-to people? Sorry.
Well, I read Brian Mann's articles quite a lot in the US. I think Brian Mann is one of the best writers and tends to tell things as they are. Robert Smith, I think, is the other guy. I think his first name's Robert. Also very, very good in calling a spade a shovel and getting his messages across fairly succinctly. Fergus Connolly is, to my liking, one of the foremost sports scientists in the world of professional sport, currently employed by the San Francisco 49ers, but has worked in rugby over the years. And he's probably my best go-to. And Dr. Craig in Australia, and for the Clive Duncan. Craig Duncan is the other one. Craig works for football in Australia. Did some great work with the Socceroos and over the last few years, as well as with Sydney football. And he's another brilliant mind as far as sports science is concerned. And if you get access to any of their data and websites and chats, I think you can't go wrong.
Mm-hmm. I had Brian Mann on the podcast as well, so check that out, will you?
He's I've yet to meet him. Hopefully, I'll meet him at NSCA at some stage or someone. Yeah, sure. But he's a genius.
Yeah, certainly is. It was a great episode I did with him a couple of months ago now. So, yeah, that's excellent. And I just want to say thank you very much again for your time, and obviously point people towards the website, and all the links that you've mentioned will be on there with regards to your Elite FTS articles and stuff like that.
It's a great pleasure. Thank you very much. Any time that I have a chance to sit down and chat to people, it's just a joy to me that people want to actually have a chat. So it's marvellous that I can have a speak. Can I speak to different people and hopefully people can sort of benefit from one or two of the ideas that I have and make sports people better performers.
No, it's been a pleasure, and thanks to Tom Mclaughlin for making the link as well.
Oh, excellent! Yeah, he's a great bloke.
Yeah, definitely. Right, mate. I will. I'll keep in touch, and thanks again for your time. And I will speak to you shortly.
Much appreciated, Robert. Cheers. All the very
best, mate. You too, mate.
Cheers.
Thank you. Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for tuning in to episode 32 of the Pacey Performance Podcast. I hope you enjoyed the chat with Ashley. It's great to hear from someone who's been in the game for such a long time and with such great experience from all over the world. So as I mentioned in the intro, there is the new site, the new Pacey Performance site at paceyperformance.co.uk. And as I mentioned before, all different ways to listen to the podcast to make it easy for you to get the information. There's also all the links that Ashley mentioned in this episode on the site. So if you just go over to the Ashley Jones page, all the links will be about halfway down. So thanks for listening, and I will see you in episode 33.